Fancy yourself as a bit of a dirty Harry and wondering which 357 Magnum to buy? Well, stick around, punk. I may just make your day. Hello and welcome to AAR On Air. Today I'm looking at a couple of pellet and BB versions of the 357 Magnum replicas, with probably a bit of a guest appearance too. They are from different price brackets and different manufacturers. The ASG Dan Wesson 715 6-inch revolver and the Umarex Colt Python 357, which is also the 6-inch version. Now, I've reviewed the 4-inch ASG 715 before, and I own a couple of the older Dan Wesson revolvers also. So there's also a comparison to be made here between performance of shorter length barrels and different loading methods for the shells. That being front or rear loading. In the past, I've also completed a tuning guide to the Dan Wessons, which involved the changing of the shells or cartridges, however you want to call them, from front to rear loading to increase the feet per second, with very successful results. You may want to take a look at that. But before the power tests, let's take a look at the guns themselves. Firstly, the Dan Wesson. This has a very squared off look to it around the bottom of the barrel and has a great weighty feel to it and a comfortable rubberized grip. It's solid, well constructed and has a nice smoky grey finish to it, but it does show up the fingerprints. The barrel is recessed for that added realism, and whilst it has open sights, front and rear, it can be fitted with an optional rail for red dots, etc. if preferred. The cylinder rotates nicely and feels engineered. The safety is behind the hammer and is simple and smooth to use. The trigger is somewhat clunky and takes a bit of getting used to, and the best results are obtained from pulling the hammer back first. But doing this simply adds to the overall experience. There is a bit of an annoying hammer bounce, but it's not a deal breaker as far as I'm concerned. Dropping out the cylinder is done via the catch just in front and to the side. Then the shells can be loaded individually or with the supplied speed loader if you prefer. Loading the CO2 is simply a case of removing one side of the handle, slotting in your CO2 and then tightening with the built-in hex key. Return the handle and you're ready to go. Now, the hex key is built into the handle, which is a favourite of mine because you've got very little chance of losing it. There is a 3 joules sticker on the side, but it would be very, very easy to remove it without damaging the pistol in any way. It's cool. I like the ASG version. So, onto the Umarex, or the Colt Python 357. Now, I've made no bones in the past how much I admire Umarex and their seemingly endless range of guns. So I was very keen to get my hands on this to have a bit of a review. Again, it's a real meaty handful in bright chrome this time, with a pretty realistic faux wooden grip. The barrel is somewhat more rounded than the Dan Wesson, but it's also recessed for realism. The safety is in the same place, but doesn't feel quite as secure as the ASG version. The trigger is quite heavy and chunky, but is more controllable than the Dan Wesson, and there's none of that hammer bounce with the Umarex. Loading the CO2 is by unscrewing the nut, I suppose you'd call it at the end, with the supplied hex key. Slot in the CO2 and then retighten. The only thing I must say is this one is not as simple as the ASG version. And of course you've got a hex key that you could lose, but it's a fairly standard size. So it's perhaps not as user-friendly as the ASG version. The catch for the cylinder release is behind in this instance for it to drop out. And it is a really nice shaped item, giving it loads of character. But this is where the Colt seems to show its price difference. You see, the Colt is about £140 UK, whereas the ASG is nearer £195 UK. And the cylinder is nowhere near as smooth and doesn't feel quite as engineered as the ASG Dan Wesson does. In fact, it almost feels a little toy-like, not being as engineered, in fact, as the Dan Wesson. After saying that, it functions perfectly well, but the price difference is evident in this part of the gun. Whilst I'm talking about rattles and tolerances, the barrel on the Colt also feels strangely loose and seems to have some play in it, which I feel will have some effect on the target work. The shells are BB versions and simply load the BB into the front and again load them individually or with the speed loader that is provided. Okay then, so with a seemingly rattly barrel, let's have a look at the target work and see how it performs. Well, the target work surprised me a little. I expected the pellet version to outperform the Colt BB version, but it actually held its own, and it was pretty credible results. Not a huge difference between the two, Colt and the ASG. Remember, these are straight out of the box with no practice over the 8 metre range and simply the first 6 shots out the barrels. Power then. Both of them are 6-inch barrels, one BB and one pellet. But most importantly, one of them is the front loading version and one has the rear loading pellets. So with that in mind, the Dan Wesson should, in my opinion, have the edge on the Colt. So let's take a look. Okay, the Colt Python 357, first of all, and we're firing on BB's front loaded shells. I have to be a bit careful today out in the garden because we're shooting through out into the garden. We've got a pair of great tits out there. I've got to be careful how I say that, but these pair are actually nesting outside and flying in and out all the time, so we want to be very careful with those. 380. It's just disturbed a pigeon. 364 as opposed to 357. 374, 341, 361, 351. I think that's it. It is. That's that. Okay. What I'm going to do now is just try putting in some of the shells from the Dan Wesson. Now, they seem a little loose, but we'll see. Now, these are rear loading shells with 7.33 grain JSB pellets in it. So, $282, 147. Doesn't like them. 150. Definitely doesn't like them because they're not fitting quite right. Okay, worth a try. I've got the front loading ones as well. Let's just try a couple of those. See if it has any bearing on it. Oh, this is going to work. They feel a bit sloppy. 189. 183. No, they're not fitting right. So, answers the question if anybody asks. No, you can't put the Dan Wesson shells into the Colt. They don't fit. Here we go then. Dan Wesson. 380. 373. 342. 354. 368. 366. I think that's as done. It is. So, the Dan Wesson showed an average of 364 feet per second, giving 216 foot-pounds or 2.92 joules, using 7.33 grain JSB pellets. The Umarex Colt showed an average of 362 feet per second, but only 1.56 foot-pounds or 2.12 joules, because it was using the lighter steel BBs. So the Colt was a little down on power, and this could simply be the fact that the shells are front-loading, with the Dan Wesson effectively having the extra length of the shells, thereby extending the length of the barrel. Let's drop some front-loading shells from my old Dan Wesson into the ASG and compare it with them then. Now, in theory, the front-loading shells should fit in this, because they're also Dan Wesson. We'll give them a go and see if that has any effect. 268. 272. 256. As you can see, the feet per second figures are greatly reduced, with an average of 265 feet per second, which equates to 1.14 foot-pounds or 1.55 joules, simply due to the pellet travelling less distance from a front loading than a rear. Then I tried this with the Colt using the Dan Wesson's rear loading shells, but it didn't like them at all, and the fit wasn't sufficiently snug to show any benefit or usable figures. Sum up time then. Price has to have a bearing on it. And in this case, the higher the price, the higher the quality, it seems. So, because it's in a different price bracket, perhaps comparing the ASG to the Umarex Colt isn't really fair. I'll leave that decision up to you. The quality of the Colt doesn't match the Dan Wesson, but the trigger is slightly better. You may or may not like the looks of the Dan Wesson, with its more squared off barrel. And then there's the slight bounce on the hammer, which you don't actually notice that much when you're shooting it. If money is tight, then the Colt is a nice replica to have in your collection. But if you can afford that little bit more, the engineering of the Dan Wesson would probably get your vote. But either of them could easily make your day. Thanks for watching. Don't forget the usual stuff like subscribe, share, and I'll see you next time.